Dr. Myra Hastings stood inside the dimly lit time corridor, her heart pounding as the machine she had spent years perfecting began to rumble. The polished metal walls thrummed with energy, reminding her of the magnitude of the journey she was about to undertake. She glanced over at her partner, Ellis Friedman, who stood beside her in the corridor. Together they had decided to venture forward, though the future, in their research, had proved frighteningly uncertain. They had glimpsed irradiated landscapes and twisted ruins, but curiosity and duty compelled them to see the truth for themselves. There was a low hum, followed by the sharp hiss of compressed air. Circular lights flickered red, then green. Myra felt a familiar tug in her chest as the time corridor's quantum engines tore a hole in the fabric of space-time and thrust them forward. Through the swirling energies, distorted glimpses of an unknown tomorrow sped by, intangible ghosts of reality streaming past like colored mists. Ellis gripped her arm, and Myra sensed his fear echoing her own. When the machine finally lurched to an abrupt stop, they nearly toppled over. The corridor's lights dimmed and then flickered. The exit hatch hissed open, revealing a dusty, storm-gray sky. An acrid wind whipped past, carrying a heavy smell of soot and decay. Rock-strewn ground stretched in all directions, pockmarked as if struck repeatedly by meteor impacts. The two of them stood just outside the small, shimmering portal chamber, scanning for signs of life. Silence but for the moan of the wind. "We made it," Ellis said, his voice laced with both wonder and sorrow. Radio scans had indicated civilization was in ruins, but they had not expected it to look so completely dead. Myra adjusted her goggles, eyes stinging from the harsh environment. They were used to sterile corridors and controlled laboratories, not desolate expanses scorched by some unknown cataclysm. They climbed a ridge of fractured concrete that likely had once been a highway. The remnants of metal railings jutted from the ground, twisted as if from extreme heat. And then, on the horizon, silhouetted in ghostly light, rose what was left of a grand monument. It appeared to be a colossal tower cracked down its spine. Chunks of scaffolding hung precariously from its sides, and the once proud apex was blunt, as though another piece had fallen away. Myra's stomach twisted at the sight. The tower had the shape of an old communications array, but also something reminiscent of a monument to human triumph. Her mind flicked to the various historical pillars of Earth Eiffel Tower, Tokyo Skytree, even the old space elevator stumps. Any of them could have been the basis for this structure's shape. Yet whatever it once was, it had been reduced to a half-collapsed skeleton. A question tugged at her mind. Was there anyone left to explain its fate? Ellis took point as they traversed the jagged rubble. They advanced slowly, firearms drawn in case of mutated animals or leftover security drones. Time travel was prohibited except for government-sanctioned research, and the possibility of hostile scavengers in such a broken age couldn't be dismissed. They passed twisted street lamps and piles of scorched vehicles. Everywhere they looked, steel and pavement had melted together, swirling into nightmarish forms. At last they reached the tower's base. A wide courtyard stretched out, layered with dust so thick it caked onto their boots. The courtyard was dotted with what looked like petrified trees, their trunks gnarled into stone. Near the tower's once grand entrance was a massive sign, half buried in debris. Myra could see letters in an older script, half eroded, F.E. The rest crumpled away when she brushed the surface. They peered inside, slipping through what once might have been sliding glass doors, now collapsed into a warped heap of metal. They discovered a cavernous interior. Overhead, fractured beams let in streaks of the swirling sky. Shafts of dusty light fell onto half-submerged statues. Each statue depicted human figures in heroic poses, though many had lost their heads, arms, or entire torsos. One sculpture, partially intact, stood with a defiant arm lifted. Beneath the grime, swirling shapes were etched into the base, suggesting some sort of triumphant scene. Myra felt a pang of regret that she might never know what story they once told. Ellis knelt beside a broken pedestal made of marble. "Look at this," he called to Myra, wiping away layers of ash. The relief carved into it showed people gathered around an orb or globe. The lines were faint, softened by time, but it looked like a depiction of Earth itself, with arcs above it, perhaps symbolizing unity or progress. Myra marveled at how so many centuries of effort could be obliterated, leaving behind only cryptic relics. As they lingered, a growing roar of wind echoed from the broken tower's upper levels. Myra raised her flashlight, shining it upward. The light revealed twisted girders overhead, old scaffolding, and walkways riddled with holes. She spotted a toppled structure that might have housed an elevator bank. Shadows danced atop rotting floors, and one set of them looked suspiciously like a deformity in the shape of a crouching figure. Her heart fluttered. "Ellis," she whispered, pointing upward. But the shape vanished as quickly as it appeared. They both stood still, scanning for movement. The howling wind intensified, setting old sheets of metal clanging. When nothing followed, they pressed forward, hearts pounding. With careful steps, they found a half-crumbled staircase that spiraled around one side of the tower. Rusted steps groaned under their weight. Each footfall raised small clouds of dust, swirling in the fractured sunlight. Floor by floor, the devastation unfolded. Rooms with shattered glass walls overlooked an endless expanse of ruin. Twisted chairs and desks littered offices that might have once overseen important research or administrative tasks. In a corner, Myra found a pile of data disks, corroded beyond salvage. She tucked one into her pouch anyway, out of sheer desperation to recover some trace of the past. They ascended, bracing themselves for whatever the wind might conceal. Around the 15th floor, they discovered a collapsed walkway leading to a side chamber. Sunlight streamed through openings in the ceiling, illuminating the remains of a grand balcony. They had to navigate a precarious ledge, stepping over gaps with nothing below but a plunge into blackness. Once on the balcony, its cracked tiles were painted with color-lined shades of a once glistening mosaic that spelled out something in a lost language. Myra felt a sense of sorrow at the thought of how human creativity had been reduced to so many broken pieces. From this vantage, the city beyond revealed its skeletal shape. Half of a massive dome lay toppled on one side, while across the distant horizon, ruined spires jutted from the ground like shattered teeth. Something resembling the remains of a huge statue towered in the distance, a robed figure missing its head, an arm raised in a half gesture of greeting or warning. The fractured bodies of other monuments littered the skyline, each hinting at a civilization that once prided itself on architectural marvels. They swallowed the tragedy of this scene in silence, hearts heavy. Time's cruelty had ravaged even the mightiest testaments to human achievement. The wind whipped their hair as they surveyed the city, searching for a single sign they weren't alone. "We have to keep going," Myra whispered, though she wasn't sure where. She wanted answers. She wanted to know how the apocalypse had come, and if there was a slender thread of hope something that had survived. Carefully, they made their way back to the staircase and climbed higher. Their objective was to reach the top of the tower, hoping for a better vantage point. As they ascended, the once intense daylight began to wane. The grayish sky turned a deeper hue, and a fine gritty rain started to fall. Each droplet hissed against the steel beams, leaving chalky residue on their suits. Up here, the wind tore at them with unrestrained ferocity. They pressed on, ignoring numbness that seeped into their limbs. Near the upper levels, the air felt colder, and they noticed ragged tarps that had been tied as makeshift coverings. A sign that someone or something might be living in the tower. Myra and Ellis passed by a corridor strewn with debris, noticing scrawled symbols on the walls, possibly the marks of survivors, warding off evil or marking territory. They paused, exchanging glances. They had to be careful. Pushing the tarp aside, they entered a large, open chamber that once might have been an observatory. Beneath a half-collapsed dome, intricate machines, telescopes, or scanning devices lay broken. Crude, improvised shelters littered the corners. Tattered blankets, collapsed tents, half-rusted cooking pots. The place was strewn with the faint smell of old smoke. Myra tested the ground gingerly, stepping over a slump of rags. Suddenly, a figure burst from behind an overturned crate, brandishing a jagged piece of metal. Before either Myra or Ellis could react, the figure lunged at them with surprising speed. Ellis ducked, pivoting away. Myra tried to raise her weapon, but the attacker managed to slam her to the ground. She hit the floor with a thud, dust clogging her lung. The figure, lithe and covered in tattered clothing, hissed what sounded like words in a harsh, guttural whisper. Ellis scrambled, shouting Myra as he swung the butt of his rifle. The blow connected, and the assailant reeled backward, dropping the makeshift blade. Gasping, Myra twisted away, coughing. She heard more move in the shadows, then saw additional shapes emerge. There were at least 3 more. Haunted eyes peered from behind rag-wrapped faces. Myra and Ellis were surrounded. The group hissed in an unfamiliar language. Then the first figure, clearly younger, perhaps a teenager, spoke again, now in broken, barely comprehensible words. "Intruders, why? Come." Myra steadied herself. "We don't mean harm," she managed, her heart pounding. "We're travelers from far away." Her mind raced, searching for a way to communicate. She tried broad gestures, lowering her weapon. Ellis followed her lead. The figures exchanged glances. One older among them pushed back a hood, revealing deeply etched lines and scarred skin. Forced vowels emerged from chapped lips. "You travel? Why come here? This place dead." Ellis set down his weapon, palms open. "We came to learn what happened, why this world is destroyed." His voice wavered, but there was sincerity in it. "We want to understand. We want to help if we can." Slowly, the tension in the room eased, though not by much. The ragged survivors looked uncertain, but they lowered their makeshift weapons. The older figure motioned them to the corner. There, behind a half-collapsed pillar, a small fire pit scarred the floor. Myra and Ellis perched gingerly on a broken beam, while their hosts crouched around the pit. One of the younger ones stoked the embers, and, soon, a small flame danced, illuminating desperate faces. In pained English, the elder told their story. They had once been children of a city that stretched across these plains. The city, known as Alenth, had thrived on advanced technology powered by the planet's core. They had built monuments of steel and crystal, but an exponential surge in solar radiation, combined with atmospheric depletion, forced them to shield the city beneath gigantic domes. Political factions warred, each blaming the other for the cataclysm. Systems of life support began to fail, and nuclear-based weaponry was unleashed in a final bid for resources. The rest was a patchwork of nightmares. Radiation storms, volcanic upheavals, toxic air that seeped through cracks and turned the populace into shambling husks. The survivors retreated to whatever enclaves they could find. The elders' group had taken refuge in this tower, once the center of communications and astronomy, but each year their band shrank further. Myra and Ellis listened intently, struggling to hide their horror. These survivors were proof that, even in unimaginable devastation, living beings continued forward. Myra discreetly recorded part of the conversation on her handheld device. If they could return to their own time, perhaps the data would help them prevent this timeline's fate. Eventually, the elder fell silent, grief glistening in exhausted eyes. Myra offered small rations they had packed, nutrient bars, water purifiers. The younger survivors devoured the bars, gazing at the pair with something that resembled awe. Ellis rummaged through his pack and produced a small medical kit. With gestures, he offered to clean a wound on one survivor's arm. Timid acceptance followed, and the group watched in fascination as he carefully applied antiseptic and bandages. Through pointed questions, Myra gleaned further details. The city's last attempts at salvation had centered around what the survivors called the Triumphant Gate, a monumental arch built to channel energies from Earth's core. However, the project failed midway. Rumor held that the arch was still standing somewhere in the city's northern quadrant, an incomplete marvel that might hold secrets about harnessing unlimited energy. If that were true, it could explain the cataclysm, or hold clues to reversing some of the damage. That night, they slept fitfully, huddled in a corner of the observatory. Wind whipped overhead, occasionally scattering loose debris. Somewhere in the distance, tortured metal squealed. Myra's mind was a flurry of images. The carved statues in the tower's entry, the melted highways and the battered survivors. She longed to see the Triumphant Gate for herself, Perhaps that final project could offer insight. Or perhaps it would be yet another haunted relic. By dawn, if dawn was even the correct term for the dull, hazy light that replaced night, the survivors had agreed to guide them part of the way. They ventured down the tower's spiral staircase as a group. Myra marveled at the trek these survivors made daily in search of meager supply. Though the air stung, they navigated the ruined city with relative speed. They passed fallen statues, each a once proud tribute to progress. One statue depicted a figure holding a cosmic sphere, lines shining from it. Another statue, nearly disintegrated, had once been a trio of prophets gazing skyward. Each was a testament to how humankind had yearned for greatness, and how thoroughly time had erased that yearning. Everywhere, rust and rot eroded the surfaces, twisting them into monstrous shapes. Eventually, they reached a great plaza filled with broken columns and collapsed arches. Shattered shards of glass glimmered on the ground. In the distance, twin spires of what must have been the triumphant gate rose high, curving inward like the beginnings of a massive arch. The top section was missing entirely, perhaps never completed, yet even in ruin it emanated an austere grace. The spires were lined with intricate patterns, perhaps once inlaid with shimmering materials. "No one goes close," the elder survivor muttered, their voice trembling with memory. "Place cursed." Myra's heart quickened as they crossed the debris-littered plaza, weaving around sinkholes. Each step felt heavier, as if the air itself warned them away. Ellis kept a hand near his rifle, scanning for threats. All around, the remains of advanced machinery, huge turbines, twisted cables sprouted from rubble. Myra's mind raced with the possibilities. If the gate was intended to channel the Earth's power, then maybe there was a ruin of a reactor or a machine that had tried to tap into energies best left dormant. When they drew close, the elder survivor stopped. "No further," they rasped. Their eyes flicked with fear. "Spirits of the old city dwell. Too dangerous." Myra nodded, understanding the legend. She offered them thanks, aware that these survivors had done more than enough. The small group hovered at the plaza's edge, uneasy. Myra and Ellis continued on alone, stepping over massive snake-like cables that coiled along the ground. The spires towered overhead. Parts of them showed meltdown scars, as if an intense energy had once surged indiscriminately, warping the metal. Circuits the size of a person hung from open paneling, wires frayed and flickering with intermittent sparks. They found a control station near the base of the left spire, half crushed by fallen beams. With some effort, Ellis shifted debris, revealing a panel covered in a layer of black ash. Using a cloth, Myra wiped the surface. Beneath the grime, faint glowing symbols blinked. Some sort of emergency power source continued to pulse. Centuries later, the text displayed cryptic warnings in old fonts. "Meltdown, evacuation," a recorded voice repeated in a loop. "Core breach imminent, disconnection recommended." Myra felt the hair on her neck rise. She toggled an ancient switch on the panel. To her astonishment, part of the structure hummed to life. A shutter moved through the spire, and faint lights glowed up its length, flickering unpredictably. "Incredible," she murmured. "It's still active after all this time." A high-pitched whine rang from the spire's interior. They exchanged worried looks. If the meltdown had never completed, there might still be volatile energy trapped within. Ellis hurriedly tried to access the panel's data logs, hooking a portable translator to decipher the archaic code. Myra kept watch, scanning for any sign that the labyrinth of cables might erupt with a lethal surge. Fragments of data scrolled across their device. Technical notes about tapping geothermal flows, the formation of Terra lenses, and a final message about a catastrophic alignment error. People had died trying to harness unstoppable power. Suddenly, arcs of electricity snapped from a cable behind them, crackling in the dust-laden air. Myra yelped, diving aside as the cable lashed out like a live serpent. A swirl of energy flickered around them, intensifying as some dormant protocol jerked into half-dimensionality. Flames erupted from a grounded console. The spires groaned ominously, their tortured skeletons trembling, as if reawakening to an old nightmare. Ellis managed to detach the translator from the panel, stumbling backward. "Shut it down!" he yelled, wiping sweat from his brow. But Myra, searching frantically for an alternative switch, realized the meltdown was unstoppable now. Generations of disrepair had eroded every failsafe. They had inadvertently triggered the final stages of a process that had never been resolved. They sprinted away from the spires. Blue and orange lights danced along the gate's half-finished arc, crackling with pent-up fury. Twisted metal began to collapse, sending shards and sparks raining down. Exhausted and choking on smoke, Ellis and Myra barely made it past the plaza's edge when a deafening explosion tore through the air. The ground heaved, and a wave of heat slammed into their backs. They dove behind a fragment of fallen wall, hearts pounding as the thunderous roar died into a ringing stillness. When they dared to look up, the triumphant gate was gone. Only a twisted stump of a spire stood, belching noxious smoke into the sky. Metal shards littered the plaza. Myra's mind reeled with guilt. They had awakened the ruin, finishing what the apocalypse had started. Perhaps in centuries the gate's final meltdown was inevitable, but it felt too raw, too sudden. The Elder and the survivors had fled the plaza. They were nowhere to be seen, likely taking cover within a safer part of the city. For a moment, Myra closed her eyes and tried to absorb the scale of what she was experiencing. All her life she had studied the possibility of timelines and divergences, convinced that learning from the future could avert global catastrophe. But seeing it firsthand made her question if humankind's desire for unfettered progress had doomed them. Ellis put a trembling hand on her shoulder. His eyes shone with the same remorse. "We can't fix it from here," he said quietly, "but we have to make sure our own time learns." They made their way back through the rubble to the place where the small band of survivors had gone. The tower was a looming presence, with one corner now partially collapsed from the shockwave. The Elders group wandered near the base, looking shell-shocked. Their tear-gidget eyes demanded an explanation, but Myra and Ellis could only bow their heads. The Elder nodded sadly, as though acknowledging a tragedy beyond words. They had to return to the time corridor. The ephemeral portal remained open for only a limited window. Myra handed as much of their remaining supplies to the survivors as she could spare. Water filters, medicine, energy packs. She promised them that if there was a way, she and Ellis would try to come back with more help. None of them seemed to hold out real hope. But a spark flickered in younger eyes, some small sense of possibility. It was a silent march back across wasted roads and scorched landscapes. The twisted monuments loomed in the background, mute witnesses to a civilization that had once soared. The wreckage of the tower behind them, the collapsed gate, the broken statue on the horizon. These were all signals of warning of how fragile human grandeur truly was. When they reached the shimmering outlines of the time corridor's portal chamber, the air felt painfully still. Myra paused at the threshold, looking over the bleak cityscape. She wished she had the power to bring restoration, to plant seeds and watch the land heal. But that was not a power any single person possessed, especially in this broken future. She and Ellis stepped into the portal, hearts weighed down with sorrow and determination. Paradoxically, the corridor felt sterile and safe compared to the battered world outside. Lights flared as if greeting them home, beckoning them back to their original era. Myra felt the swirling energies envelop her, and images of the broken monuments flashed in her mind's eye. The hush of centuries drifted away behind them, replaced by the humming technology of their lab. Within moments, though it felt like an eternity, they emerged on the other side, back in a pristine room of polished floors and advanced screens. The corridor's engines powered down, leaving them disoriented. Colleagues rushed forward, bombarding them with questions. Myra and Ellis collapsed to their knees, a swirl of dust drifting from their suits onto the gleaming tiles. Eyes red-rimmed and distant, Myra slowly extended the device containing the data logs. The onlookers quieted, sensing something monumental had transpired. Myra looked up at them with trembling determination. "We have to act," she said, voice cracking. "All those wonders we built, they can become horrors. We can't let it happen that way." No one in the crowd dared speak. In that moment, the burden of knowledge weighed heavily on everyone. A shared understanding took root. That the future was not guaranteed, that humanity's monuments could either stand as testaments of a better path or crumble into twisted wreckage. Myra held Ellis's gaze, and in that silent exchange, they knew their mission had truly just begun. Outside the lab's windows, in their present, the city's skyline gleamed with its own proud towers, towers that might one day end as broken husks, if warnings went unheeded. And so, in a hush that fell over them all, they carried with them the memory of those twisted landmarks, the hush of broken dreams. The future was lost, but perhaps their return could ensure it stayed found. They would share these secrets of a land once glorious, and strive to protect the world from the haunting reflection they had witnessed. They rose, battered but resolute. Work would begin immediately, urgent and consuming, for they had seen beyond the horizon of complacency into the realm where all that was strong had eroded to dust and skeletons. The only question that remained was whether their own era had the wisdom to honor the warnings of a future lost. And, as Myra looked again at the logs in her shaking hands, she vowed that the broken monuments they left behind would not have fallen in vain.